So hello, everyone. I direct our platform and partnerships work at Creative Commons. I've been there for about 8 years, so I've worn a variety of hats. I know everything there is to know about Creative Commons licensing, so happy to answer any of your questions. So I don't know who's in the room and how familiar you are with Creative Commons licensing or copyright at all, but the Creative Commons licensing plugin on edX is a relatively new plugin, and it was created in a hackathon during OpenEdX in 2014 by Feedback Fruits and the University of Delft. And then it was implemented in June of 2015 last year. So there's been about a year of the plugin to make its way into your own platforms. So I just want to get a raise of hands. How many of you are familiar with the CC licensing plugin on edX.org? Okay, so only very few of you. How many of you are familiar with Creative Commons and know what Creative Commons is? How many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, so that gives me a good idea. I might actually go over some basics, and it might be a good refresher course for those of you who already know about CC licensing, just so that we get everyone up to speed. Essentially, this session was originally designed around how can we increase user engagement and content reuse on the edX platform, but also across the various instantiations of edX that you have all by your companies, at your institutions. And I really here wanted to learn from you. So maybe Gabe's going to tell me at the halfway mark of this session so that we can have some time for discussion. I'd really like to hear more about your users, what kinds of users you have, what kinds of needs they have around sharing content, and when it comes to actually attributing content and reusing other people's content. So this is what I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over the basics of Creative Commons and who we are and what we do and what the licenses are very quickly. Then I'm going to talk about the state of Creative Commons licensed works in the world. We just issued a report last fall that reported a milestone of 1.1 billion works in the Commons, which means there are 1.1 billion works on the web for anyone free to share and use, as long as you give proper attribution or don't do things like use things commercially. But I'll get into all of that in a minute. And then I'm going to talk about Creative Commons' new strategy going forward in 2016 through 2020. We just published it in January along with a $10 million investment by the Hewlett Foundation, so we're very proud of that. And it really announces a new sort of venture direction for the organization. And I'm going to talk about OpenEdX and CC. I'm going to show some screenshots of the actual CC licensing plugin, some areas where I think the plugin could be enhanced, and I'm looking forward to working with some of you who are developers or designers on how we can extend that plugin to incorporate things like automatic attribution, gratitude, building up a creator's reputation. And then I'm going to give some examples of other OER platforms who are doing these things pretty well. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion. So that's a good overview of where we're going to start. So while I talk about Creative Commons, I'd love for you to have these questions in the back of your mind for our discussion later. So I'd love to hear more about your users and what they want, what motivates them to share on your edX implementation run by your company, your institution, or wherever you are in the world. It must vary culturally and it must be very diverse. And then what gratitude features might further motivate them to share. So gratitude is going to be a huge piece of Creative Commons' new strategy. We don't yet have a specific definition, but we have a broad definition, and it includes things like attribution, giving credit to creators, giving them thanks for contributing to the commons under CC licenses, being able to view the source of a work, and I'd love to brainstorm some ideas with you on what more it could mean and what kind of features we could build into edX.org. So to start with, for those of you who aren't familiar with Creative Commons, we are a nonprofit organization. We're global, and we offer a set of copyright licenses for anyone to use to manage their copyright online. So if you're using a Creative Commons license, you're not giving away your copyright. You're saying, I maintain my copyright, but I want to share these works under more flexible copyright permissions. For example, I want to give you the right to redistribute them, to remix them, and to even use them commercially, but as long as you give me credit. And we offer a set of 6 Creative Commons licenses. So it's a really simple, standardized, it's a universal copyright licensing standard that is in place in over 80 jurisdictions around the world, and all of our licenses are aligned to international copyright laws. So this is the kind of the spectrum of Creative Commons licenses. It really fills the space, the void between public domain, where it's a free-for-all, and all rights reserved. We were founded in 2001. Our founder was Lawrence Lessig and a bunch of other legal experts at different academic institutions, including MIT and Stanford. And they devised this copyright licensing system where you could do some rights reserved while not giving away all of your rights. So essentially, enables copyright holders to grant copy and reuse permissions to the public, and there are 6 licenses. Some of them grant commercial uses, some grant derivative uses, but all of them require attribution. And these are the 4 license elements. I'm not going to go into detail on those here in interest of time, but you can go to our website, creativecommons.org, and learn more about them. And this is the full chart of our licenses. And at the very top, you can see our public domain dedication tool, which is not a license, but a way to waive all of your rights and contribute your work to the public domain. You might be wondering who would want to do that. Well, it makes sense for certain databases and data sets. And there are actually people out there who want to waive all their rights to a work. Our licenses are unique because they're designed with 3 layers in mind. So the base license is actual legal code. It's a legal document that is held up in a court of law, and that's the stuff that is drafted by our lawyers at our organization and also around the world. And then there's a human readable summary of that license, which is what you probably see if you go to the Wikipedia page or a Flickr photo and you click on the license icons. It'll take you to a human readable summary of what you can and cannot do with a work. And then there's a machine-readable backend, which makes sure that you can actually find Creative Commons licensed works through Google Advanced Search and through our own Creative Commons search engine. So that's Creative Commons in a nutshell. As for the state of the commons, the last time we tracked growth of Creative Commons licensed works on the web was in December of 2015, where we published our 2nd annual State of the Commons report. And there we reported the milestone of 1.1 billion Creative Commons licensed works on the web. And we've been tracking it since, as you can see on this chart, from 2006. And it's really sort of exponentially increased. And this is a very conservative estimate because this only counts the number of works that were actually marked with the license on the web page. And we got the base data from Google, and we also worked with our major platform partners to get this data. This is a breakdown of Creative Commons licensed works on the web. So the green boxes are the more open licenses, the licenses that allow commercial use, that allow remix, that allow derivative works. And the purple boxes are the more closed licenses, the licenses that reserve commercial rights, that reserve derivative uses of that work. And what we've found is that the trend over time since 2006 is that more and more Creative Commons licensed works on the web are being licensed more openly and more liberally. We don't have the exact causal factors, but we think a lot of it has to do with better education. Wikipedia is a huge chunk, and all of that is under attribution share-like license. And also, a lot of governments and foundations and institutions are now requiring open licenses in their policies. So when they fund a grant, they require that all open educational resources coming out of that grant are under a Creative Commons license. So I think this all contributes to this trend of more open licensing over time. These are a few of the major platforms that we featured in our State of the Commons report. You can see that Flickr by far takes up the majority of licensed content on the web with 356 million photos. Last I checked, I think they're over 400 million now. So that's a little worrisome because Yahoo isn't doing so well. And so we're hoping that somebody will take up Flickr, but we're working with them to ensure that all the photos remain somewhere, even if Yahoo goes under. And this is being live streamed, so I probably should be careful what I'm saying, but whatever. And so Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons are also the next up in terms of they have probably combined 50 million assets and probably more since the fall of 2015. And in addition to these stats, we've gotten more than just the growth stats. So if you actually go to the State of the Commons report, which is stateof.creativecommons.org, we have usage analytics, such as the number of users on that platform, how many downloads of CC licensed content, views of CC licensed content, things like that. We also reported last year that more and more countries are going open. So these are just some of the countries that have open education policies, either at the federal, national, or state, or even regional levels, where they require CC licensing for educational resources so that taxpayer dollars are used impactfully and effectively. And that just keeps growing each year. And these are the foundations that have adopted default open licensing policies for either an entire department or for foundation-wide. So any grants that they are funding, they require those outputs from those grants to be under a CC license. So we work very closely with these foundations and their grantees to make sure that education is up to par and grantees know what they're doing when they're openly licensing their works. So all that to say, we are shifting our strategy this year, where we announced in January that we're still focused on growth of Creative Commons licensed content on the web, but we're more focused on all of the interesting stuff that happens with that content. So now that we've hit this 1.1 billion mark, there's more than enough resources that anyone could ever get through in their lifetime. So where should our strategy be focused? What should we do? We shouldn't just focus on furthering adoption. That's important. Yes, but we also need to focus on the users around the content and learn more about how that content is being used and how can we maximize the impact of the reuse of that content. So discovery is a huge piece of our strategy, making sure that all of the 1.1 billion works that we counted are actually marked up correctly, that they can be pulled into Creative Commons Search, which we're revamping, that they can be discovered on your various implementations of edX. I was just talking to Gabe about this, how we don't actually know, since we issued the CC licensing plugin for edX last year, how much of the courses across your platforms and even on edX.org are under Creative Commons license. And that would be very useful to know. And then that requires doing something in the beginning where we enable analytics and machine readable licenses so that we can actually count up that data year after year. Collaboration is a second huge piece of our strategy, where we really want to find out how users are connecting with each other, how they are building on each other's courses, if they are at all, and whether they are attributing each other correctly, what kinds of communities of practice are growing up around the content, and can we surface all of that activity in a more rich and effective way. And then advocacy is also a large piece of our work, which is less relevant to this conference, but we are still advocating for open policies at the government and institutional level. We're advocating for copyright reform where it makes sense, where it would allow Creative Commons licenses to continue to exist and be effective. And the overarching sort of vision is to light up the commons, to not really focus on just the content and growth, but lighting up the users and the usage around the content and making that really vibrant and great. So that's our focus this upcoming year and the next few years. And how that relates specifically to our work with platforms, such as open educational resource platforms like Open edX, is that we want to work more closely with everyone in this room and also the Open edX developers to make contribution to the commons a very joyful and simple and elegant act. Like Jono Bacon was saying, simple is not stupid, simple is elegant. So how can we make the CC licensing integration the most elegant it can be so that users can actually understand it just by going to it for the first time, rather than scratching their heads and wondering what does a CC license mean? And a lot of that can be baked into the user interface. A lot of that is also education that needs to go into the community. So to start with that, in February, we published this Creative Commons integration toolkit for user-generated content platforms. This contains basically everything a UGC platform needs to know to add the Creative Commons license suite for its users. It's a very long toolkit, but this is what we've started sending a lot of platforms to, and they usually get it right away because they have a team of, they either have a developer and designer and a product manager on staff, or they have someone who knows about those things. So this is a table of contents that outlines everything in this toolkit, and you can skip to whatever you need. It includes everything from aligning your terms of service on your platform so that they don't conflict with Creative Commons licenses. It contains everything you need to know about Creative Commons in your user interface and making that very simple and elegantly designed for your users. It also contains things you need to know about how to enable Creative Commons search filters for content on the platform. And has tips around how to educate your users on how to attribute Creative Commons licensed content, but more importantly, encourages you to build in automatic attribution on the platform, and all sorts of things. So there was my contact information at the beginning of this presentation. You can feel free to reach out to me, but this is also available on the website if you wanna access this resource. The toolkit also has a model platform that developers can deploy and play around with. And this model platform contains pretty much, the licensing selection tool. It has a license display, it has search, and it has a backend. And it kind of gives you an example of how you can extend it and build it for your own platform. The code, of course, is not going to be relevant to every single platform, but it gives you an idea of how to do it. And each platform has a different way of doing it. So back to OpenEdX and its implementation. So OpenEdX with a CC licensing plugin from last year, it has a base integration. You should all automatically get it. I think if you have edX, your users can select a CC license for both courses and videos. And it displays that licensed content on a piece of the course and beneath the video. So the base integration is there, but what the licensing plugin is lacking is greater discovery, collaboration, and analytics around all of that. So that's something I'd be very interested in talking to you all about. I have proposed a Birds of the Feather session at 3 p.m. I think it's in room 200 something. It's just, it's on the Birds of a Feather page. So feel free to come and talk to me if you are interested in building out the licensing plugin to incorporate any of these things. So I thought I might just give you a screenshot of where, if the licensing plugin is not automatically included in your edX.org plugin, this is the page that you can go to include it. And I think it's just adding the license thing in the code. But your OpenEdX colleagues can help you out with that. And once you have installed the licensing plugin, this is where the license shows up. So once a user has licensed their course under CC, you can go to the course and you click on See More, and then it displays the license there. But there are several things that are sort of problematic with this implementation. As you can see, it doesn't really explain what the license means here, and it doesn't link to the actual license so that users can find out more about, well, what does this mean if there's a license on it? What can I actually do with this content? It doesn't invite reuse of the content. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review here, and hopefully we can work to enhance this integration. So the license display is hidden, it's not linked. There's no clear indication that the course can be reused and remixed, and if you want to invite user contributions, that should be more clear. And there's no way to actually search on the edX.org platform for CC licensed content or by certain kinds of reuses. I don't think that you can actually download courses from edX.org right now, but that is something that might be desirable. And I'm not sure that if there's remix capability on the platform. You'll have to tell me. Maybe your different implementations do have that, or whether there's automatic or easy attribution. But these are all things that we're working with platforms this year to improve and to actually integrate, so that people can easily find and discover CC licensed content. So this is just a few places where CC licensing information might be included in that metadata box on each course page, where it tells you the effort, the price, the institution, the subject matter, and level. There could be a content license field, and there could be a way to download either that whole course or that page of the course. And then here on edX.org, you can search for content. There's various search filters where you can refine your search. That could also be filtered by license or by reuse category. For example, if a user wants to find content that they can modify and use, or modify commercially and reuse, that could be a filter, an additional filter there. And then even on the course landing page, there could be an invitation to remix this course, an automatic attribution, or at least a suggested attribution that you can copy and paste once you do decide to take that course and remix it. So I'm going to go over some platforms that are doing discovery really well, and then I'm also going to go over some platforms that are doing collaboration and analytics okay, because we're still figuring those pieces out. So Openstax College, they are a CC BY licensed textbook platform, and they have probably the greatest success in terms of adoption in the US of A. Their textbooks are being used in 1 in 5 degree granting US colleges and universities across the United States. And just so far for the 2015 and 2016 academic year, they estimate that they have saved students $39 million in textbook costs. And these are some additional stats that they have just published earlier this year. To date, since they launched in 2012, they've had 6.6 million views, web views of their books, 3.6 million downloads. And so these are sort of the sorts of analytics we're starting to see from platforms with CC licensing. This is the actual Openstax interface. So I think one of the reasons that it's getting wide adoption is because they have a very clean interface, which they recently redesigned. They have the license icon displayed and linked very clearly on the resource page. They have an entire list of contributing authors, and this is important for reputation, as Jono Bacon was talking about earlier today. They have multiple formats that you can view the book online or download it. And there's a clear call out to adopt or reuse this content with the adopt this book button, sign up for info button. And then when you go to the actual web view of the content of the resource, you can see that there are various tabs where you can sync in for more information. So there's actually a download page with multiple formats. There's actually a history of edits and contributions to the overall textbook, and it's in line with user identities. There's suggested attribution when remixing or reusing the book, and there's a more information section about the book as well. This is not an OER platform, this is Flickr, but this is kind of what I want to illustrate the search function. So if on edX.org, if search filters were turned on around Creative Commons licensed content, you can imagine something that's more intuitive for users. They would probably search for things like commercial use is allowed, modification is allowed, rather than by specific license. So that's something that we could build out for the CC licensing plugin on the edX interface. I want to mention Lumen Learning here for a second. They are a for-profit education initiative that is working with higher education institutions, and they charge for services around baking in OER into those institutions. But the OER and the software that they develop is all free. So they actually have a backend of WordPress, and they've revitalized the CC licensing plugin and built their own version where you can actually create and manage more attributions. And that's actually all available on GitHub, and you can take that and use it. They've built an LTI plugin so that you can embed Creative Commons content from their WordPress directly into various LMS systems. And they've also built a CC Thin Common Cartridge plugin so that you can export CC content from that LMS with LTI links to the WordPress CC licensed content. So this is another way of increasing discovery, is to build in plugins to various LMSs, to other platforms. And I'm not sure what edX is doing there, but I would love to hear more from you guys. This is an example of Lumen Learning's catalog of courses on its website. And here you can see an example of how they do attributions. They actually split it up by each page of every resource, each course that they have the CC license specified. And they also suggest an attribution that you can copy and paste. So that's for discovery. When it comes to collaboration, I have a little bit less examples, but these are the examples I'll show you will give you the idea, and I'd love to talk more about ways we can increase collaboration around content. So Boundless is also an OER platform in higher education. They host CC by SA licensed textbooks, but they also organize various resources into subject matter hubs. And we actually work with them on their integration and to feature their usage analytics in the State of the Commons report last year. And they're unique because they have a very active community of contributors along one central hub, which is their user interface. So here's an example of an economics hub on boundless.com. And you can see that with this hub, they show the numbers to the public. They say at this point in time, there's 1,690 community contributions to this hub. And they specify the type of contribution, and that's linked to a user identity. So the latest, I think, edit was by someone who added an image to this resource. And they also call out the top contributors, which gives credit to the contributors, but also builds kind of a credibility profile within the community. And if you actually log in and create an account yourself, within your own dashboard, you can see at any given moment the entire universe of contributions to the community and how many active community members there are. So it says here that there are 8,500 active community members. The usage analytics we got last year, that's out of 300,000 registered users that they have, and around 8,000 are active, which I guess sort of aligns with what Jonah Bacon said this morning about 10% of your users are going to be very active and 1% are going to be the users you want to chase up individually. While we're on collaboration, I want to talk a little bit more about the concept of gratitude. This is something we're exploring, and we may collaborate on a research project around with some folks from the MIT Media Lab, who I just met a couple weeks ago, so I'd love to hear if you're interested in this as well. So what do we mean by gratitude? It can mean anything from attribution, giving credit, giving thanks for contributions, connecting creators to creators, users to creators, surfacing the impact that a creator's work had on the community, and we just want to know how people are actually expressing thanks within social networks and within content sharing platforms. And so I think we're just getting started, and we'd love to hear your ideas, especially if you're doing work in this area already. And some examples of what we might mean by gratitude is this is an email that Flickr sends out to its users if your photo has been selected by an institution that uses their platform. It's in French, I think, and then it was translated. But a user forwarded this to us and said, oh, this made me feel great that I CC licensed my photos on Flickr because I got this email thanking me for my contribution and asking me if I would be included in a curated collection of CC licensed photos. Another example is, this is not related to CC licensing, but it's a good example of what we mean, what we might mean by gratitude. And so this is if you add a photo to Google Maps to illustrate a locale, and you get an email from Google Maps that says, oh, your photo has been viewed this many times, it's a big hit, and it's helping other people find this place in the world. So the last sort of prong of our strategy I want to talk about is analytics. We are definitely redoing State of the Commons this year to include more than just growth data. So last year we got data from Boundless. We got total contributions under CC from them. We got inactive versus active contributors, total views of CC content. We also got geographic breakdown and type of user. We found that with geographic breakdown, United States took up 50% of their users. And then it was India, United Kingdom, Australia, Philippines. And then with the type of user, they had 85% student users. So that was interesting. So that's something we'd love to learn about edX users, especially edX users that are CC licensing their works. Again, this is a page on State of the Commons, and the report actually goes into more detail on the various usage analytics. So this year, we're going to keep the baseline, we're going to keep the growth data, but we want to work with each platform to really surface more interesting statistics, because just saying this platform has X. We'd love to work with you to spin a stat into an interesting story. So what was the impact that this CC license work, was it carried across various platforms? How was it reused? How many students used it, et cetera? So there might be an interesting story out there around one of your edX platforms around student reuse or professor reuse of a course that was CC licensed, and we'd love to work with you to surface that in this year's report. So that's pretty much it for my talk, and these are the questions that I had up in the beginning, and then the questions that are actually in the session description, I've sort of addressed in this talk, but I'd love to hear more of your ideas around how can we clarify intent behind people who are licensing Creative Commons licenses? How can we encourage reuse of content across the various edX implementations, which I know is difficult because they don't all talk to each other? How can we create spaces within the platform itself that facilitates sharing and remix? And that might involve building more plugins or tools. And how can we effectively create a culture of sharing and remix through gratitude or other social features? So maybe I'll just pause for questions there. Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say that right now on edX, the Creative Commons plugin is limited to authors, course authors.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the learners also contribute a lot of content, whether it be through assessment or through we have an open response assessment tool. They may participate in the discussion forum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be great if we extended the plugin to allow learners or course participants to also license their contributions.
Mm-hmm. And author their own content.
Whether it be in they could do it at their student profile level, like everything I create on this platform, I give a certain level of licensing to, or
Yeah, I think that would be great. What institution do you work for?
I work in edX.
Oh, okay. So we should talk. Great.
It's similar at IIT Bombay. I work for IIT Bombay.
Mhm.
We have a commitment to release all our course content under CC license. And the same problem, so I'm currently running a course, for example, for 4,000 teachers are participating. And each one of them have to submit an OER as a part of the assignment,
Mm.
which they have been told and they have agreed that it will be released in open source. But when I get 4,000 assignment submissions, either on the Aura, OpenEDX, or on Moodle, wherever,
Mhm.
we have no mechanism of putting this kind of license automatically.
Right. So it sounds like that. So the only way we're going to get that in is if there's user demand, and it sounds like there is some. So yeah, we should talk. We should.
We also have another problem. The OER repositories which we are building are useful for discrete objects. But when you talk about a course, there's a particular sequence. And interoperability among different platforms is difficult for
Mhm.
the same course. Now, how best do I actually release my course other than just exporting from my thing and getting somebody else import? If that somebody else is using OpenEDX, it's easy. But otherwise, it's not easy for general public to utilize this courseware consistently, for example, for teaching in their own college or some such thing.
Right. So there might be a solution there with either a plugin, an LTA plugin into LMS, or a way to export the content so that at least you can download it and tinker with it. Yeah. I think there was a question here.
I have a question about the first bullet item here.
Yes.
I know that Flickr allows you to sort of set and forget
Mhm.
your license at the profile level,
Yeah.
which means that I've been on Flickr for years uploading things, and I set it to share like
Right.
years ago, and I haven't thought about it since.
Mhm.
I assume that contributes to a large number there, but what are your thoughts on that sort of approach to licensing? Because there is no intent behind my contributions. I just upload things to Flickr.
Right. So I guess the important thing is that when you first did it, there was intent, and then if you set it and forget it, I think that's fine because you can always go revisit and change the default license again. So making sure that the default licensing mechanism you can always change at any time, just like the licenses allow you to change the license choice at any time. But I think having a default mechanism for the OpenEDX plugin would make sense as well, because that way you don't have to individually license each and every course. An institution may want to, as you were saying, just have a default CC license for all the courses that come out of the institution. And we're finding that's more and more, especially with grants being funded where it requires the CC license on the content.
One of the options for the default could be always publish it every time you create a course, so that you encourage the course authors to make that choice as well.
Right, or just show the default license selection before you publish, just as a visual reminder, a visual cue that like, oh, if I want to change the license on it, but it wouldn't interrupt the user experience process.
There
That's a good
could be
idea.
a serious problem about license being extended by people who modify. So we had a similar case. We had a short video which was in English, which was edited by one college teacher to add one example, which was peculiar to his own class.
Right.
This was translated in Korea by some Korea teacher. And then another teacher added another example in Korea. Now the last fellow has to quote all the license names of the license holder.
Right.
The license becomes larger than the content.
Yeah. So, I mean, I showed some examples of other OER platforms doing that, where they just show a history of contributions in one tab, and it's automatically taken care of for the user. That's something that, we want to automate as much as possible, because I think when it comes to attribution, and we've worked with communities for, over 10 years now, it's just, no one's going to attribute correctly. It just takes too much time. We need a way to automate that for people. And CC is, I just want to say one more thing. CC is actually building a prototype for one-click attribution, but of course that's specific to our own technology. It's not going to be extensible to edX necessarily, so it's something we'd love to work with edX on, having one-click attribution across edX. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so I feel like we have two examples of types of content which can be licensed CC. that are very different, right?
Mhm.
There's like the Flickr image, which is extremely easy to consume and reuse, and then we have like the edX course, which
Mhm.
has like a data structure,
Yeah.
right? And it's, I'm kind of curious about what other common things people want to share would be along that spectrum,
Mhm.
aside from just, sort of consumable items like images and strings of text.
So let's hear from everyone in the room. What are your users actually sharing and licensing? I know edX currently allows videos and whole courses to be licensed, but there's images. Are there specific other types of resources that are being shared?
University of Adelaide had an LCI application, and they wanted to put source code for that.
Okay. So software code should not be CC licensed. There's a whole open source software world for that and a set of licenses for software code, and we don't recommend CC licenses for them. Only kind of content, consumable content, because that's what the licenses were designed for. Creative Commons licenses anyway. To address one issue you sort of raised is around chunkable pieces of content. So you saw that with Lumen Learning, each page of their course, they have a specific license governing that page versus just an entire course being licensed under a Creative Commons license, because as we all know, every course has multiple components, and even, one line or one image could be licensed differently. And so that's something important to think about. If we could maybe extend the licensing for images, extend licensing for other kind of pieces of content within the course. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Maybe of like the transcript.
Yeah. So is there a way currently on any edX implementation to sort of translate directly within the platform, or do people have to do it manually and then just kind of upload it back up? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if there's actually a separate file format for transcripts, that it could be extended to translations. For me, this is my first time at the Open edX conference, so I'm at a loss as to how to actually get this stuff to happen. So if there is user demand for extending the CC licensing plugin, I know there's a hackathon event after this. Is that generally the place where people demand things and people get together and hack on it? Okay, so you're nodding your head. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that far, but I will be in touch with the edX team following the conference. Any other questions? Do you have one more?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of following up on the chunkable idea, are any of these platforms that are out there also sort of disassembling their respective chunks into, say, images and text? Like on Boundless, they have these hubs of nice chunks, but could I also just search all the images on Boundless?
So not with Boundless, because Boundless is one of those OER platforms where there's one default license for all site content. So for them, it's actually kind of easy. They just say everything's under CC by SA, except where otherwise noted. And so generally speaking, they have that hub, everything is under that license. And so it's really easy for people to just know that. I would say I don't really know of any good OER platform where they've actually separated out the different pieces of content that you can search for that. So that's a piece of search and discovery. If we extended the licensing for different pieces of content, then you should theoretically be able to search by different kinds of media as well, since it's attached in a different way. Yeah.
Follow-up, so legally speaking, if I made a course on edX that I licensed as share-alike, for instance, or something which allows remixing, basically, am I also effectively licensing any images in my course as share-alike?
You can only ever license something that you own the copyright to. So assuming,
I own the copyright to all
right.
images in my course.
Right. So if you're licensing a course under the license and you don't accept otherwise note that this photo on page 1 is under a different license, then yeah, any incoming user would just assume that the license governed the entire course. So you'd have to make a note beside that image specifically and say this image is not governed by this license, because that's the only capability right now that is in edX.
I can see why nobody's tackled the disassembling content chunks problem now.
Yeah. Yes.
Just sort of remember, the levels of the CC license, right? I mean, there's one where there's no remixing allowed, and so then you kind of have to take the whole thing, right?
Yeah, so generally how we deal with that issue of different chunkable pieces is the overarching course license, you can say, except otherwise noted, this entire course is licensed under this one license, but look at the image captions for different licensing elements.
Thinking that your image might be used separate from the entire course content.
Mhm.
You would be able to control that with the level of the CC license, correct? If she owned the license on the CC, on the image.
So not necessarily, because in an image being part of a course and taking that image from the course is not necessarily making a derivative work. And that just depends on the definition of derivative work under United States law, copyright law. And so in most cases, unless you alter the image itself, it's not a derivative work. If you pull it out, it's considered a collection. A course is a collection of materials. But don't quote me on that, although I'm being recorded. Yes.
For a course where students contribute to, and that gets altered, and then in the next offering, that same content that's been altered is offered to new students. Do you have a license? Is there a license for that type of contribution?
Yeah, so Wikipedia is the biggest community website in the world, and the way they deal with it is that everything's just under this one default license, and all community contributions go under this default license, and this is how we want you to attribute. We want you to attribute Wikipedia, and then there's the history of edits are on this page, et cetera. And so that's something you can do if it's a course you imagine being used again and again for 10 years, you don't want to have to attribute every single student that ever made contributions to that course. You maybe have a page where there's a history of edits, but you have one default license governing that course. And usually share alike, if you want the community to keep coming back and contributing to a resource, share alike is a good license to go with. And that's why Wikipedia has chosen share alike. Oh, so we're done. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to come to my Birds of a Feather session at 3 p.m. if you want to continue this discussion or just have questions in general. Thanks.